Hello, I'm Svitek, and welcome to my vlog, where it's both my mission and my pleasure to highlight my creative journey in hopes of inspiring you, giving you specific takeaway, all that way your journey can be at least a little bit easier. Now, before I fully dive into everything and what I've been doing, I would love to take the opportunity to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. That way you get all the various lessons and episodes that I put out right when I put them out. Thank you if you just did, and thank you if you already were. It truly does mean a lot to me, as I hope it does to you. So let's get into the thick of things. So this past week or so, in terms of the creative stuff, one of the things that I was working on was editing this sizzle reel for a project that a few of my friends are putting together. Now, the good part about it was that I didn't have to start from scratch, essentially. They'd already done a lot of their legwork in terms of the edit, and so for me, I was more so polishing it than building from scratch. Now, the thing of it was, they had put it together. It was about, 2 minutes. I was able to cut it down to 1.5 minutes, roughly. But the thing of it was, they're both new to editing, and so it wasn't the editing that was the toughest. It was more about kind of cleaning up some of the organizational work that was there. For example, the clips that they were using in that specific edit was the rough sound, right? Was the, as we call in the business, scratch audio, not the good recorded quality from the microphones that we wanted the audio, right? So I had to kind of go back and pull that audio and make sure, that it was part of the edit instead of not. And, before I fully talk about just this project in general and other stuff of it, I do want to talk about how organization is such a key thing that we just don't overall consider. Whenever I teach editing, I spend a good chunk initially on the organization, which frustrates a lot of people because they're always like, well, okay, fine. Teach me how to edit, I'll worry about that later. And it's like, no. If you don't know the organizational stuff, you won't know how to edit. And the reason I say this because it's, even with a short film where you don't necessarily have a lot of assets, like in this particular case, right? This is literally a 1.5 pages of script, and everything was pre-planned well in advance in terms of the shots and how it was going to go. Still, when you get to the edit side, it really slows you down in terms of editing, right? And so now imagine working on a project like, I don't know, let's say Lord of the Rings, right? Like the ultimate, it's a trilogy. It's each movie's about 3 hours, and that's the trimmed down versions and so forth. Like, how are you going to be able to function without that organization? You're not. The goal is to work at the speed of thought. And when you have things organized, you can more easily do that, as opposed to literally finding out what's where and so forth. So organization is key, and not just for editing. By the way, I was really reminded of this. So I work with the Financially Fit Foundation, which is an organization that essentially teaches financial literacy. It teaches people how to gain control of their finances and live, as we say, in alignment with their values, not their ego. And the system itself is called the SAVE system. So spend in alignment with your values, not your ego. And really, as we're diving in with the various people and so forth and kind of ramping up teaching, I was really reminded, it really starts with the organization side of it. And that is the hardest part of it. Gathering all the materials, putting it all together, having all the things ready, because then to implement that system itself is pretty easy, and you can rinse, wash, repeat sort of thing, no different than editing. But without that integral first step, that is quite laborious seeming, you don't build that proper foundation, and you need that. So that way the rest of it can be easy. And so in that sense, it was just a great reminder of both, like from a creative standpoint, as well as in other things, how important organization really is. And it goes to anything, right? The more organized you are, the more you're setting yourself up for success. And even speaking of this project, it was very well thought out, right? So now, as far as the edit, I didn't really have to do a lot necessarily with it. It was just cleanup, right? And the whole reason for this was because from a conceptual standpoint is very well realized of, what the script is. Then I was also involved in the shooting of it, right? So we were very meticulous about the shots we wanted to get because it's a sizzle reel. So it was, we weren't pulling from a larger project. We were literally just going to shoot the shots that we needed to create this promotional video, essentially. And so we planned that out very meticulously. And so in that respect, we know exactly the edit from start to finish. We knew in our minds how the things were going to cut. And now it was a matter of adjusting okay, here's how we thought about it in our brains and what we thought it would look. And overall it's close, but I think, if we trim this or add this effect to it, it'll help enhance it, whatever the case may be, right? So in that sense, it's very much coming together very smoothly because we front-loaded the effort at the beginning to really figure out how this was going to work. And, Robert Rodriguez often talks about this, like the more, oftentimes what happens in movies is that people always try to put off making a decision till the very end, and therefore they need to shoot a lot, spend a lot of time, ergo money. When, if they just make the decision early on, it saves all of that, right? And same thing with, like, if you really study Hitchcock, he was kind of like that. For him, essentially the most fun aspect of it was the script phase and the pre-planning phase, because he could figure out the entire movie. And then once they were shooting and editing, it was really boring because he'd already worked through that, and essentially it was just being arranged in the way that he always intended. Or so the legend goes. I'm sure there was slightly more to it than that, as there always is. But, that's the basic premise. And when you can do it that way, that's what can lead you to success. As I said, the reason why Robert Rodriguez talks about this, and in fact is an example of this, is because it is what allows him to work very fast for a lower budget than most people, and therefore he can be more creative, which he likes, and certainly I like, and therefore want to do, right? So just something to keep in mind. And the other good news about this sizzle itself, a lot of my work, we're very close as far as the edit. We're getting to a point of what's called picture lock. That means all the timing of the edit is locked, and then it goes to, this mostly, there's like visual effects shots that need to be added. So, most of the notes that we're looking at are based on that, and then it needs to go into sound design. And then once the VFX come back, then it can go into color correction, and all those things are married, and we're done. All right. So yeah, it's we're very, very close. One thing about it is that right now, speaking of things that are temporary, we're using a temporary voiceover that drives the narrative of the sizzle reel. And, the final sort of pass, like it's always kind of a chicken and the egg sort of thing with, do you cut to the voiceover, or you try to tell it visually. And so you're always kind of adjusting the visuals to the voiceover, and sometimes, the voiceover to the visuals, yada, yada, yada. And in this case, we have it pretty finessed based on the temporary voiceover that we do have. And now that we're close, we can get the final recording of the actor themselves. And I'm sure, there's going to be adjustments needed just based off of the timing, even just small timing, like a frame here, frame there, whatever the case may be. But then, we'll be pretty much locked and ready to send it off to sound design. Sound design can't go without, it can in theory. It's just, again, talk about like having to have things organized. It's much better, especially in this case, to have it all locked off. VFX, in this particular case, the shots themselves wouldn't necessarily change, so that those can go and be made, right? So VFX, you don't need picture lock to be able to work through, right? So I just wanted to clarify that. But yeah, I'm excited for this project. I really believe in it. To see it come together, it has been awesome, and to see their version of it, like very bare bones, and be excited by it. And all I really needed to do, like I said, was timing stuff. And, what I did was add music, add certain flair that I can do, that I know how to do within editing. And overall, like when we talk about the VFX, there was some green screen shots that, right now they're not finalized, but I offered at least, as far as the edit itself, just a rudimentary idea where, I did a very basic chroma key to it, and took out the green screen and put in like the rough backdrops of what will appear there. So we just have an idea of how the things flow. So that got us a lot closer, right? So, you just kind of iterate and get closer and closer to the final product. So yeah, that's the sizzle reel. The other exciting creative project that, I've been working on and talking about for a while is this animated trilogy of movies that I am in development of, called The Arbiters. And the phase I'm at right now is writing the first draft of the first movie. And so, this is based on an outline that I've been revising with a group. And right now, I'm about 67 pages into the script. And in terms of the outline, I'm on bullet point number 37 out of 70. So roughly about halfway there, which is exciting. Slowly but surely it's coming to fruition, which is exciting. Now, what I find myself doing is I'm in this phase of writing where I'm just trying to get to the end. And so there was an action scene, for example, where I knew kind of what needed to happen, but, rather than spend so much time thinking about it, because it just seemed like such a challenge and I wanted to get to other stuff, I kind of wrote it like very basically, just basically writing garbage just to get through it and just to give an idea of what it is. So, the script itself, I wouldn't even call necessarily like the first draft, because once I'm done with it, it's not really readable. It is for those who know the story and who know me, but like for anyone that's not aware of this, they're going to be looking at it like, what is this garbage? What is this hot mess? But for me, one of the reasons why we even decided to go with the script, knowing that the outline still could have been finessed a little bit more, was we needed to see the characters come to life. We need to hear them, see how they acted, and, you know, the various things that might be like a line and an outline now gets expanded, you know, and you can start to see the world better and so forth. So we can maneuver within that and discover these things as we go. And that's what's also been fascinating throughout this whole process is, as I'm thinking about it, things are becoming clearer. And what I'm doing is there's scenes that, you know, I wrote already where I'm like, ooh, I think it would be better if this happened. Or, you know, here's an idea maybe to utilize, or here's just a general note to consider, or, you know, here's a plot thread that I started that, you know, seemingly hasn't gone anywhere and won't be going anywhere. So kind of maybe consider taking out or making sure it does tie in together later. And of course, I think like the old me and a lot of other people would perhaps go back in and address those things as they're going. And some people do this and it can be quite successful for them. But for me, as long as it's noted, as I said, for me, the goal is just to get to the end. And then once I have this, which for all intents and purposes, we can call like a very detailed treatment, you know, like a scriptment, if we want to like, you know, make up a word that combines script and treatment. But then I can go through that and revise it, you know, and oftentimes like, I'm a big advocate of this. It's a lot easier to revise something than to be staring at a blank page. And in fact, I utilize ChatGPT quite often. You know, I'll say like, I'll give it a command of like, what would a lieutenant say, you know, if he had to order an escape? And it'll give me, you know, something along those lines. And, you know, I might have it like expand and give me a little scenario, whatever the case may be. And it's not perfect, right? It's not like I'm going to now take that and copy and paste it, but it gives me something to work with. I'm like, okay, cool. I know what to do with this. Boom, 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 right? So the more I can essentially bridge that gap of not staring at a blank page and more just taking something and revising it, that's the beauty. And because, you know, the creativity of all of it is the story that I'm ultimately trying to tell. You know, so as far as the rest of it, you know, I'm not worried. And that's kind of been my process through this. And that's why, you know, the more I can get to the end, instead of being hampered by the notion of, okay, well, you know, I know, like, I have all these notes and they should get addressed and whatever. It's like, okay, those notes are there and they will be addressed. But now's not the time for them. Let them rest. And because ultimately, you know, I could go back and I could spend, and as I said, you know, it can be successful for many, many people. Like many successful writers sometimes revise as they go. And that's great for them. But in this case, it's, for me, at this stage, a lot more beneficial to just get to the end. Because once I have it all, some of the notes might be irrelevant. Some of them I'll know how to better address now that I, you know, have the whole thing much more mapped out. Yada, 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 right? So that's the phase and process that I'm at. And it is funny, you know, it's a technique that Ryan Holiday, who's the prolific writer of Stoic books, such as The Obstacle is the Way, you know, he talks a lot about, you know, his writing. He'll be like, you know, he'll write something and he'll be like, insert example. And, you know, he'll bold it and just kind of move on because he wants to continue his thoughts, right? He wants to work at the speed of thought. And he knows that, you know, he can go back in and research, okay, what is an example that he needs to put in there to make it make sense. Stephen Pressfield, who is the author of The War of Art, he talks about this too, you know, just that incessant voice of ours that demands perfection. it really hampers us. It really is the voice of resistance, and therefore, we get no work done. It seems like it might be the better route, but we don't get as much work done, for the majority of us. And again, for some people it works, but, in this case, for me, I'm just having a fun time getting through it and seeing the puzzle come together. Lastly, as far as creative stuff, I've been working on my second novel, which, if you've been following along, you've heard me say quite a number of times. And this has been a start project, I've hit various roadblocks and, because it's a project that deals with a lot of AI. And, it's quite an ambitious project because of the psyche of the main character and whatnot. And in many ways, it's a story that can very easily become cliched. So I want to make sure I avoid certain tropes and, really make what I'm trying to say my own, even though, it's within a genre that has certain conventions and so forth. So much in the same way I'm tackling the Arbiter's script, I'm kind of, I have a revised outline. I had a outline initially from way back when that I actually started writing a while ago and have like 15,000 words written. But now I've taken a step back. I revised that outline and kind of combined some, new ideas to finesse it along with the rest of it. And so I'm like, what? I don't exactly, I know the broad strokes of it, but let me just start writing and see kind of what comes out and revise it from there. So my goal for this week is to do chapter 1 and 2. Most of my chapters are about like 3,000 words. And I've already begun chapter 1. So I think I have around 1,000 words of that already. So let's see how this goes. That's going to be my goal, and it'll be fun. I'm just going to apply that same ideology of just keep writing. Even if at times it's crap. Even if I can't get through a chapter and it's just like a paragraph of here's what's intended to happen, blah blah blah. I'll see you in the next chapter. Even if that's it, at least just, getting from quote unquote start to finish, just having something there, and then I can finesse the rest of it, right? And that's kind of why I talked about, the sizzle reel first, because that's at the end phase of, now all that sort of hard work of just, having these ideas and finessing them. And now we're putting the final pieces together, that and, when I'm presenting with the writing is at the beginning phase of that, right? So that's how all of that fits together. Now, that's what I've been doing creatively, but I also do want to share some thoughts about just life stuff in general that I think would resonate, or at least, stuff that you might have been considering and so forth. So that's what I'm about to get into. One of the things, though, as I dive into this and so forth, I would love to, if you appreciate what I do and get some benefit out of it, and think I might be of more benefit to you, well, consider joining my Patreon, patreon.com/PhilSvitek. There's just one tier. It's $10 a month. So everyone gets the same thing. But it's a way for me to connect with you directly, right? So whatever you might be facing in your world, creatively and otherwise, it's a chance for me to really address that, right? So, yeah, really consider it if you can. But if it in any way puts a financial strain on you, then please don't. I will continue putting out all these various free lessons to you as I have been for the past couple of years. Also, one of the things I want to say, this movie Suzume recently came out. It's an animated movie by the director Shinkai, who did Your Name and Weathering with You, and it's really like sat in my mind. And what's nice is, you know, I mean, the whole reason why I'm doing the Arbiters, which is intended as an animated, you know, story, is because I love that genre. I love the medium that it uses to tell its story, and certainly, you know, Your Name, Weathering with You, and now Suzume are prime examples of what this medium can do. And it's just so gorgeous and it's beautiful. So A, I encourage you to go check it out. B, for me, it's been fun to really see that movie and be inspired of how I can really push the Arbiters creatively. You know, it goes to that idea that, like, after I saw Suzume, not that I'm stealing ideas, but, you know, more so it just opened up my eyes to, you know, because I have animation as a tool, I can basically do anything. And so, you know, the story that I'm writing is a fantasy story. So the things that happen, like, you know, if they're coming in at a 5 out of 10, get them to a 10, right? Make them as fantastical as it can be. And so, yeah, it's been really fun to be inspired by that. And if you want to hear my thoughts on Suzume, I posted both a non-spoiler review and then a spoiler version as well that you can check out on my YouTube page, youtube.com/@PhilSvitek YT. All right. Sorry for all the plugs, but, you know, I just love that movie and figured some of you, you know, you might as well, and therefore wanted to, you know, offer that up. So a couple of weeks ago, one of the podcast shows that I work on, you know, there was this section at the end that the host thought should be cut. And, you know, for me, it's always fun to be able to have some creative input on the shows. And I remember speaking to the host, I said, listen, give it another 24 hours, really think about it, because for me, I think it is one of the stronger moments of the episode. It is one of the most real, you know, and I get why you would want it cut out. It can be a little bit scary and so forth, but that's why I think it's needed. And so, you know, I said, consider really, you know, think about it, and if, you know, after a day you still feel the same way, I'll totally cut it. You know, no protest from me, but just wanted to at least voice my opinion. And it ended up being that they were like, okay, fine, you know, I trust your judgment, sort of a thing, you know, even though they were still nervous. And then the episode gets released, and so many people responded on social media, and, you know, people that knew the person personally as well, like, just from all areas of like, oh my God, you know, what an incredible message. I'm so glad that you spoke about that. And it was just awesome, not because I was vindicated in any sort of way, but just that this idea of when you do something that is genuine, you know, however scary it might be, you know, having that boldness to step forward leads to good results. Not everyone's going to respond positively, you know, all the time, but the people who it is intended for, the people who it is supposed to have an impact on, it will, because they'll see that. It'll resonate with them. And this truly did, and I'm so thankful that I had that role to play, and that, you know, this person believed in me, and went for it ultimately. And I also applaud them. And I think, you know, kudos to me though, I will say, for that strategy of like not being like, hey, it absolutely has to be in, blah, blah, blah. No, I was like, listen, I'm going to speak out because this is something I believe in. But if you disagree with me, it's your choice, right? And I allow them that space. And I think that was part of it, you know, where it really gave them the space to consider that thing. So, I don't know if it all applies to you, but, there's a way to, I think if there is a lesson, it's how to voice your opinion in a way that isn't threatening and allows people that space, So, one of the random things that I was talking with somebody was just life and death and, passing on and so forth. And I forget how exactly it came to it, and I forget exactly how I said it, but I was, my friend basically said to me, like, oh, I would hate to be your friend and die. It seems like you would just, move on pretty quickly. And I'm like, okay, well, first off, what's wrong with that? It's not that I would forget somebody when they passed away, but I said, consider this. If I passed away, would I want any of my friends and family to be miserable? Who benefits from that? Now, of course, I don't want them to rejoice or whatever, but yeah, celebrate the life I've lived by, carrying on, if anything, the lessons that I've impacted, or just being happy, right? Like, I don't know. I think we get into this. It is interesting to me. Like, we feel if people aren't mourning us, like people need to be miserable in some way. Otherwise, like, there's no respect. And it's like, no. Why would I want that for my friends? And vice versa. And if anything, like, it's not that I've forgotten about anyone who's ever meant anything to me that's passed away. But it doesn't behoove me, and it's certainly like, whatever the truth may be, I don't think it benefits them for me to, suffer once they're gone. So I don't know, just sort of this idea of death is really interesting simply because, I don't know, I think me and friends are getting to that age where, not that, we're staring death down the barrel, so to speak, but, the people in our lives that we used to look up to, whether grandparents or, other elder people, like, they're leaving us, and they're not always going to be there. So it's more prominent, and, there's a lot of teachings and cultures that talk about, you essentially reverse engineer your life based on, how do you want to be remembered after you pass away, and what do you want to have accomplished? And so by working backwards, you can start to make the steps now to be able to do that, right? So that's in essence why, I've been thinking about death and so forth. Which kind of leads to, for me, if there is any sort of dichotomy in life, I think there's this dichotomy of victim versus creator. It's a way of saying, that old adage that, life is 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. And so you could see yourself as this victim of circumstance, whatever those circumstances may be, or you can see yourself as a creator within the life that you have, regardless of what happens to you. Borrowing from the ideas of like Don Miguel Ruiz, he talks about how we are all storytellers, right? And so you can engrave a story of victimhood into your mindset, or one of, as a survivor, whatever the case may be, something more positive, right? You get to choose that for yourself of, as I said, it's 10% of what happens to you, 90% of how you respond to it. And so what's the story that you're gonna choose to believe, right? And there are some people who play the same tune in their lives over and over, and that being a negative one. And it's interesting to kind of observe how that may permeate in various aspects. I remember a few months ago, I was talking with a friend about a person, and they're like, I don't know if I buy that about that person. And I'm like, okay, why? I don't know, it just doesn't, they were like, me, I like to get at the truth, and this doesn't seem like the truth. And I'm like, okay, I was like, why do you not think that's the truth? Because, as I told this person, what you're hinting at is that it has to be something rather nefarious. And okay, fine, perhaps it might be or whatever, but who benefits from this? To spend time thinking about it and so forth. It didn't change the outcome of anything. It didn't ultimately help anyone. It was just wasted mental effort. And, recently in therapy, this is something that we talked about, how much of your brain are you using for personal matters versus, big matters. And that might seem like, well, of course, everything's personal and whatnot, but if I had to kind of clarify it, it's more so how much of it are you spending on minutia that is just quite, in many ways, driving you literally insane. As Byron Katie would say, the problem is we believe our thoughts and then we suffer. That's what it is, So this person that I'm talking about, they were just, first off, it wasn't even, they had nothing to do with the situation. And yet they couldn't let it go of that whatever I was saying was not true, because the truth of the matter had to be nefarious. And it was I'm just looking out for you. And I'm like, I'm perfectly happy. It's you who seems to be bothered by this, who has nothing to do with anything, So I just find that wildly fascinating in that way. And so when we talk about on the personal matter, it's okay, I've handled that. I thought about that. We're good. It hasn't affected me. And where I'd rather put my thinking towards is how to be a better friend, how to elevate the arbiters and all my other creative projects. That's what I want to put my mental capacities to. It's similar to how I hate tabloids. I hate just celebrity news. I hate gossiping with people in general. To me, it's just it's just uninteresting. If I'm ever going to talk about a person, it's more so I want to extract the lesson out of it, because it's, for me, it's never really about that person. It's more of, okay, what is the greater lesson to be learned from, that person? But gossip for the sake of gossip and belittling people and so forth, I have no interest in that. And that's what I mean about spending time on personal matters, and perhaps there's a better way to express that. I'm sure there is. But that's how I'm looking at it and terming it, at least at this point in time, right? So, do with that what you will. But I do think, that sort of dichotomy of victim versus creator, it's an important one. What are you going to choose for yourself? Because in many ways, the state of the world is demoralizing, right? I look at our health insurance, and just, it's just ridiculous. Also, just the state of our country in many ways. If you turn on the news, it can be quite demoralizing, right? It just depends what you pay attention to. It's, and in many ways, there's definitely points even in my life where I feel even when I'm doing my best, it's the world keeps telling you that you're not enough and you need to do more, right? Society's definition of success, or, certainly the rising prices of everything. It feels like we're on this treadmill, everything keeps increasing. our paychecks do not. So it's like you got to go out and make this money, especially, you know, if you want to make all this art, then it's, you know, you got to find the resources, right? Which can include, you know, time and certainly money, people, and so forth. Like, it's a lot of extra effort to be able to do that amongst already all these other responsibilities. So it can be a lot, and it can really sort of grind you. And, you know, certainly, like, even for me, right, as a filmmaker, you apply to film festivals or script competitions, or you submit to agents or whatever, like all these different things. And if you're just getting no after no after no, you know, certainly actors who go out for casting auditions, they face this, or novelists who submit queries and so forth. Like, this is evident throughout. Yeah, it just, you know, that idea that you're not good enough starts to seep into you. And so that's where really the idea of, you know, you can be a victim or you can be a creator of the life you want really comes to play, you know, because it's like, okay, yeah, this is what seemingly the world is pointing towards and hinting at, but how do I overcome that, you know, regardless? And so for me, you know, so far, listen, there are plenty of things that I would love to do and projects, and I have high ambitions. And so the projects that I'm choosing right now work within my means. And certainly I set the bar high, you know, to say, like, I want to make an animated trilogy. That is a bold statement, right? But I've, you know, based on the experiences that I've had and the lessons and so forth, I know how to make movies. I know that I am patient and hardworking and so forth, right? Like, so I have all this evidence of myself, and I've gained the various skills to be able to do it. And I know how to, you know, minimize the cost. And as I've talked about in prior episodes, I know how to, as needed, break down this project to more manageable parts to get it ultimately across the finish line. And I know this is going to be a very long-term project. I mean, this could literally be the next 10 years of my life. But that's how much I believe in the project, you know. And certainly The Lord of the Rings was the culmination of J.R.R. Tolkien's life in many ways, right? So, you know, if I came anywhere close to that, that'd be a huge success. That'd be a great investment of 10 years for me creatively. It really would. And so that's what I'm choosing, right? As opposed to being a victim of X, Y, and Z, right? You know, that's why it is interesting, you know, I listen to the Filmcast, which is a podcast about movies. You know, they review movies weekly. They also talk about movies they've been watching, that they recommend and so forth, some movie news, and all that kind of good stuff, right? And it's hosted primarily by these three people, Dave, Devendra, and Jeff. And I remember after the Oscars came out, or, you know, the Oscars happened, they were talking about the, you know, award ceremony. And one of the things that was talked about was this idea of a lot of the recipients were like, you know, never give up on your dream, keep chasing your dream. And it becomes sort of this fallacy because, of course, the people that are giving that message have essentially made it, right? They found the success. They're the Oscar winners, but there's plenty of people who don't win Oscars and so forth. And I think that's worthwhile looking at. But I look at it from a nuanced perspective because, you know, when you do something simply for the accolades, especially something like the Oscars, in this particular instance, who's determining the metrics of what gets Best Picture, right? This is not a 100-meter race that is very clear of how a person wins, right? Sure, there are best practices of like the schmoozing and so forth and the campaigning that goes into, you know, an Oscar win. And certainly, like, you know, comedies just in general don't win Oscars. Fantasy, like Lord of the Rings, was really pretty much the first like fantasy movie to win an Oscar. So that's another thing. Like they like more kind of grounded dramas, it seems like. So you can kind of guess at like what would win an Oscar. But again, it's not like these rules are hard-coded. And in fact, that's why people thought that Everything Everywhere All at Once wouldn't necessarily win, because it was so out there in terms of a movie versus like a Banshees in Inisherin, or perhaps like even Top Gun was, you know, it was just such a like quote-unquote feel-good movie and so well respected that it was like, you know what, this could legitimately win, and it could have, right? I mean, I don't know the ultimate like voting breakdown percentage of what to what. So yeah, there's that notion that whoever's espousing, you know, chase your dreams, you know, that it's one of those things that they've managed to do it. And so we shouldn't chase awards in that way, you know. For me, I remember like before I finished my second movie, they were like, okay, well, what happens if like you write all the books, you make all the movies that you want, like once you've done it, or you haven't made it, I forget exact the phrasing, I used to know it by heart, but essentially, you know, they were like, what happens then? I was like, if at that point I've made all the books that I want, I made all the movies that I want, like redefine what making it means, because I've made what I wanted to make, you know. But for others, they just have it in their brain to, yeah, the accolades, the affirmation, the fame, the fortune, all that. And for me, it's not about that. I just want to be able to make the stuff that I want to make and work with the people that I want to make it with, right? You know, that I love, and so forth. Which is why I think the idea of, you know, especially in film, there's the notion that it's all about the end product. You know, you're never gonna remember, you know, what it felt like. It's always, the audience will never know what it felt like to make the movie. They'll just remember the movie, and that's what will survive the test of time. And I think a little bit of that's true, right? But it's also inauthentic to say it's all about the product, because for the individuals making it, it is about the experience, right? Like, you know, that's going to be the majority of what happens, right? Like, for some of them, it could be years of laborious effort to bring something to light. And so it very much speaks to that idea of like, it really is about the process, right? Like winning an Oscar shouldn't be the end result. That's like the end product. You know, if you work on the process, you'll have it'll work out. And I'm not quite saying it in the way that I want to, but you know, there's a difference to me between pushing yourself to your limits versus having a toxic work environment. And I think that's the distinction that we need to make when it comes to art in general, right? Like, the collaborators that I work with, you know, I want us to achieve new heights, to see what we're capable of, you know, therefore inspire ourselves, inspire others, and so forth, without it having to be toxic. And I think that's where we need to draw the line, because there is, when we say it's all about the end product, I don't think that's a blanket allowance for just all the heinous shit that, quite frankly, Hollywood has been known for, and, you know, to a degree is still known for. So that's something that, you know, for me, I am conscious of and want to make sure that I'm doing correctly, right? So I encourage you to think about it in that sort of nuanced way. The difference between a toxic environment and pushing yourselves to your limit. Something that, like, I don't know, I just thought about, right? Or not literally right now, but just in general, is as we talk about a lot of this stuff, right? and we talk about how easy it can be to be demoralized by any of this stuff going on in the world with our art and just be, beat down to a pulp, so to speak. It's like, how do you overcome this? And sometimes just the power of the hug, man, I tell you. Where nothing needs to be said, but when it's genuine, the closeness and the pureness of it just resonates this feeling of everything's going to be okay. Without needing to say, like, I don't necessarily know how it's going to be okay in that moment, but it just comforts your body into the state of calmness, which then can allow you to start to get at the solutions that if you're just stressed and have this anxiety over, you will not be able to get to. So yeah, I just think about the power of hugs, quite frankly, and what they can mean, and how it just signals to somebody like, I got you. I may not know, I may not understand, I may not know what to do, but I'm here for you, and somehow it'll be okay, right? It's just such a calming, resetting type of an act that I think is awesome. We should all really do it in a much more genuine way. Another thought that came to me a couple weeks ago was that I was reminded of how exceptional I truly was. And I had this get-together with various people that I love and respect, that many of whom I hadn't seen for quite a number of years, actually, because of COVID and other stuff. And we're all together, and these are all people that are so hardworking, so ambitious, and so forth. And yet, all of us, including myself, we have those moments of doubt, like we're not doing enough, we're not good enough, right? All the things that I'm speaking to. And it's, in some ways it's because we're comparing ourselves to the higher echelon of already people that have made it. We are also our own worst critics. And we also sometimes, like for me, I love looking at examples of other artists to be inspired by, but it can sometimes be easy to conflate that into like an individual person, like where you're taking hundreds of examples and all of a sudden, it's like, oh, this one person, like this made up person is doing all these things, right? Because these are all the lessons you want to apply to yourself. And so it gets conflated as like, oh, you should be doing all of it. When in fact, like, yeah, you've taken 100 people and extracted the various lessons and the things that they're doing. And so even for them, it's not like they're doing all of those things. Like each individual person is doing a very specific subset. And so what I'm hinting at is this idea that we should all have a little bit more grace with ourselves, because there's like why I was reminded of how exceptional I truly am is because, I was working with somebody that was just starting off, and the difference of their stamina versus mine, it was night and day. And yet, even to this day, I can at times think of myself as lazy. It's like, whoa. No, I'm not. I just have extremely high standards and so forth. And it's not to say that, I want to, or perhaps even should, take my foot off the gas pedal. But just having that grace with myself to know that, like, it's okay. You're doing good. And as for the person, like, they'll get there. They're starting off on their journey. And if they want to, they can, get to the level I'm at. But it's going to take time. I mean, this year, literally, I'm going to be celebrating 20 years within entertainment, right? I edited my first documentary at the age of 15 for hospice, that aired on ABC, and That was a very profound experience. But yeah, you know, like I've been at this for 20 years. That's incredible to think about. So it's a process. It's a journey, right? So yeah, you know, that's kind of what's been on my mind recently. The last thing I'll share, as we're like in tax season, like we're wrapping up taxes, you know, I really think we should adopt a system where we essentially vote with our taxes. Like, you know, when we pay taxes, we choose each year where the money should go towards. So like roads, schooling, technology, military, and so forth. And, you know, it being where everyone has to give at least something, you know, like whatever the minimum percentage is to at least each category. But I think, A, that would just make people want to pay taxes. And B, that would be much more representative, you know, ultimately of how we spend our money, you know, because money talks, and I think that's important. And, you know, it's something that's been an idea of mine for a number of years, and I've not acted upon it, just because, again, there's so many other things that I'm focused on. It's like a should idea of mine. But I'm sharing it just in case it sparks something within you, or somebody you know that's an activist or so forth. I don't know. It's just an idea of mine where I think if we were able to choose as citizens where our taxes went towards directly, it would create a greater participation, and it just seems much more equitable in that way to me. Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. I truly do appreciate you. As always, if you have any thoughts or questions, comment down below or hit me up on social media at Svitek. Feel free to suggest any topics that you would love to have covered in the future. I would love to get to them. And I hope to see you next time.